about, but it's really about just to have an open conversation about things people have tried. Today it's about student engagement, but what people have tried to engage students in the classroom, things that have found successful, things that they might have found successful years ago that aren't successful anymore, or tips on how to work with our students now. I do feel like a wily veteran now that I have taught my first class here at Springfield College. So I now have seen Springfield College students in action.
What are you teaching?
Intro Psych at 8 a.m.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
It's a mix of freshmen to seniors,
Oh, yeah.
all these majors. It's an interesting group of people, and everyone seems nice. They were super engaged yesterday morning,
Cool.
considering it was 89 degrees in Lockwood Hall. So, but before we start, now I'll start with just a couple of questions to get people's thoughts. I'd like to have everyone introduce themselves. I'm Chris, as you all know, Chris Hackla, and this is a new person to our staff. So,
I'm Kyle. I'm going to be the graduate associate working in the center. So nice to meet everyone. Nice seeing you around a lot.
I'm Wayne Rodriguez, exercise science studies.
I'm Alvaro. I'm in biology chemistry, and I'm a first year appointment.
Hi, Sue, exercise science and sports studies. Don't rock the table.
Oh, sorry.
No, there's a whole coffee store pre-you,
Yeah.
and that's where I'm at, so I kind of actually lean down, so we just need to be ginger.
Feel free to
Is
rock
the cup
boat.
half full or
Yeah.
full?
It's,
Full
my cup runneth
over.
over, yeah. Thank you.
I'm Bree Perkins, Learning and Development Coordinator.
Becky Lartigue, Humanities.
I'm Judy Hertling. I'm Director of Academic Advising.
I'm Tyler Markkinen, Math.
Nancy Cannonberg, actually an adjunct faculty in the master's program accounting. My first time teaching, so I won't have a lot to add, but I'm hoping to learn a lot.
I bet you will.
Abdullah Rahayam from EMFM.
Great. So, as I said, the topic's on student engagement. I gave you folks some stuff to read. So what I want you to think about for a minute, and then we'll just sort of open the conversation up, are what are some of the things that you've done in class to get students to engage and participate? And then what are some things that you thought might work that didn't quite work?
Well, I'll start with a pretty basic idea, which is calling on students when they're not raising their hands. So this might be too low level for the conversation.
It
but
might not be. I mean, how many people have tried that, just cold calling students?
All the time.
What do students think about it?
So my experience, and maybe I just need to try it more, is that they almost like get offended, or they get upset that I'm calling on them. Why are you calling on me?
Mm-hmm.
So
I think it's a
how do
calling
you
out.
select,
yeah, right.
how
Putting
do
them
you
in
select the
spot.
students to call?
Well, that's the thing. So perhaps I don't have a method, right? Perhaps in my mind, if you haven't been participating yet this semester,
Mhm.
you know, your game for me to call on you.
I do have a strategy that some people may have heard me talk about before. But so the first day, I collect these little note cards. And I get their names and everything. It's not unique, everybody does this, right? So I bring them to class and I tell students I'm going to use them to randomly call on them once in a while. And so I shuffle the cards and I just randomly call on them. But here's the trick. You don't have to call the student whose name you see on them. They don't know what you see. So you can call on whoever you want. But then you take away this idea that you're picking on people.
Right.
It's this illusion
Right.
that, so I do it all the time.
Oh, that's
And
cool.
so I
Good
don't even
idea.
look at the card, I just like, yeah, and I hold it up and they're like, I called on you? Yeah, they don't see
Right.
anything. And I typically go after the student who is,
Devious.
who I'm pretty sure knows what's going on early on, but who hasn't raised their hand. And then after that, it's fair game. Anyway, and I do a lot of what you say is that I'll call on students who haven't participated in a while. And you know, they always, but they don't feel as called out because they think it's random.
Right.
So it's not a terrible strategy. Don't tell them though. Don't tell them that. But it's something I've tried. Other people?
Well, I think just to piggyback on that, I've used, like Jolly Ranchers and things of that nature, so if they raise their hand and get an answer right, and they love that. Yeah, just little things like that, little treats, yeah.
Jolly Rancher. I mean, the rewarding students is
Oh, yeah.
fun. And you can throw it too.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
Oh,
you can throw it.
Yeah.
And if you're a good throw, don't if you're not a good throw. You can hit a student.
Yeah, I've had some really, unfortunate circumstances, people lost an eye.
Yeah.
At
I've
least
heard
they're
that
the
about
Well,
right
then,
class.
like,
Yeah.
There you go,
Right
help
class.
is right.
Good.
Yeah.
So it turns into practical.
My classes lend themselves to conversation a lot better, you know, teaching literature or essays that are debatable or, you know, full of discussion possibilities. But it still is really necessary to like watch for the, you know, looks and like respond to the kid who's provoked by something or and nudge them or urge them, you know, to speak. And then sometimes there's those ones with the sort of resting angry face and you think they're not into it and actually they write these lovely things and so you can use writing to kind of prompt them the next time or something like that. But it's sometimes hard if you don't set that tone right from the beginning, that like what is expected is everyone will say something thoughtful every class, you know, which is an expectation I can have in the way my classes are designed. I mean, they are mostly discussion based. And then when we conference and sort of say, you haven't quite been up there, what can I do to make you feel more comfortable? But there's still some who just want to be more sponges and absorb.
Do you set that expectation the first class and tell them that that's what you expect them?
Yeah, it's in the policies to like earn an A for participation is thoughtful participation, you know, which could be, and I give them options, asking questions or responding to something someone said, or even just reading aloud, or, you know, that there's various ways, because everyone's not an extrovert or willing to share their opinions. But it's hard to keep that going. Fatigue sets in, and they just kind of get tired, or they rely on those more dominant students. So-and-so will say it, I don't have to.
Have any of you ever had the problem of a student who talks too much?
Oh, yeah.
I how do you handle that?
I've actually taken the student after class and said, you know, obviously I love your participation. You're doing a fantastic job, but I need to make sure that other individuals are participating. So give everyone else an opportunity first. And they were very thoughtful after that. When they would look around, they would wait, you know, they're like, I'm like,
Nothing.
Right.
Too
right.
soon.
so we just had a relationship that I could say, you know, shut it down a little bit. But I think what Beck said is establishing a safe environment from the very, very beginning. And even when students are responding and they're giving me maybe a wrong answer, I'll be, that is great for this over here,
Right,
but
right.
not really here. But I really like your thoughtfulness, and kind of reward them for the participation so they feel like, okay, well, I wasn't right, but she really appreciated me talking. And make that known that I really want this to be a dialogue and reciprocal. I want to learn something from them as well, because they're all coming to the table with something, right?
I mean, this is math specific, but when someone gives a wrong answer, I mean, the instinct is to say no.
Yeah.
That's not the right answer.
Right.
Who has the right answer? But if not taking too much time out of the
Yeah.
class, I do want to kind of figure out what their thought process was, because there might be a nugget of truth,
Yeah.
in what they were working with.
Right.
So.
Well, the no would come out if it was like the life-saving. Like if we're looking at,
Right.
you know, a downed athlete and they're like, well, you pick them up. Then it would be like, no,
Right.
no.
So you could
That-
actually
Yeah, so
further
there are
injure
no's, there are
something.
appropriate no's.
Right.
And in math, it seems like there's probably more appropriate no's.
That's
Yeah.
that's probably
I can relate with accounting, so.
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
there are some right and wrong,
That's
so.
right. Correct.
Some
There
are
is a
interpretive.
black and white.
Yeah.
Right.
What's interesting is that I teach psychology, and students say all kinds of things in class. And one of the surprising things, I'm not sure if any of you have had this experience before, is a student will say something that is so unbelievably hard to know how to respond to. And I give this example all the time, but it's a student who told me in class, when I asked what their earliest memory was, she remembered being born. She remembered moving down the birth canal. She remembered her head arching around the pelvic bone and emerging to the bright light. And I was a third-year graduate student teaching a class. I didn't know what to say. So my first response was, nope, you don't. And I even came up with, well, you couldn't have seen anything. It's dark in there. I mean, I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to say. But over the years, like you, Sue, I've learned to try to take the answer and shift it, because there are times where a student will say something, and in particular, they'll, in psychology, they'll self-divulge, and you want to not discourage the conversation. You do not want to discourage them from saying something, but you have to somehow figure out a way to cut through. And it's a real challenge, and part of it is understanding the context and setting up, as Becky said, early on, the expectation of what's gonna happen in class. And that is, within math, I mean, I would set the expectation, sometimes the answer's gonna be, no, that's not it, you missed the step. And then sometimes in psychology, no, that's not the way we understand things right now. But it is really about setting expectation and giving students the freedom to be able to express in a way where they know they're not gonna be ridiculed. Because I mean, Becky used the term called out before. That's one of their biggest fears, is they're going to look silly in front of their classmates. And so you have to work around that without putting them in a position where you just get people sitting on their hands. I observe lots of classes, and I'll tell you, the hardest classes are when the faculty member does the Ferris Bueller thing. Anyone, and they answers the question. And I'll tell faculty when they do that, I've timed how long between asking the question and the response before the faculty member answers their own question. And on average, over the course of my observations, anyone want to guess how long a faculty member waits before they answer their own question?
3 seconds.
6 seconds.
It's closer to 3 seconds. It's 2, 3, 4 seconds max, because that's about 4 seconds.
Right.
That feels like a lot in a
Awkward,
class. It's
right,
awkward. And so it's a matter of waiting too and giving students the time to process. Have any of you tried the strategy of having students, when you have a question, you want them to participate, of giving them a moment to write things down? Because that's a really good, powerful strategy. Give them a minute to collect their thoughts, write down their thoughts, and then ask them. And that's quiet time, but it's quiet time where they're doing something. And if you've seen the Cross and Angelo book on classroom assessment techniques, it's one of the most common, the minute paper. You give the students 1 full minute, time them to write it down, and at the end of the minute, have them pick up their pencil or their pen or stop typing. And then they've done something for 1 minute where they're engaged in it, and then they have something to say. Becky?
So I want to circle back to something you said kind of in passing, that we kind of agree that students are afraid to look dumb in front of each other. They don't want to be called out. But I find an equal, if not greater, number of students afraid to look smart in front of each other. And so I'm curious about what people do with that, right? That, to avoid the other students like rolling their, it's Travis again, or someone's got something to say, oh, this again, or like teacher's pet. What have people done to sort of prevent that kind of in-class negative peer pressure? Like, we're all supposed to be a community of learners, and when it's just you and a couple high-achieving students who seem to be really engaged in the others, that can suppress participation.
Before we go there, I just want to throw one idea I've done occasionally, because I think it's important to get them talking right in the beginning, like the first couple of classes before habits set in. But I've done brainstorming, like, what are all the bad ways to do time management? Or like, what are all the things you shouldn't do with a broken boat? And get them giving back, like, purposely ask for wrong answers. And just because more of them will
Yeah.
come
Groupthink
up
works
with
better,
ideas,
yeah.
and then we shift gears. But that's an interesting question you raised.
Well, two comments. One is what Judy said. I mean, I think that getting them to say anything early on is helpful. I think that having them say something where they don't feel ownership to it is really good. I mean, I have for years asked students just questions about themselves the first day, where they're just telling me where they're from and what their major is, and just get them to feel comfortable talking helps. But so I think that's great. Becky's point's an interesting one, though, because that negative peer pressure exists in some classes, and the further you get into the major, the less you see it, because the students are all invested. But it's in those intro courses,
General
where
education.
with the general education courses, where the students don't want to look like they're invested in this content, and that's going to be, if the curriculum committee votes and approves the first year seminar, and all students take that first year seminar, that's going to be one of the bigger hurdles. because students are gonna wanna see that course as just a general education course. The faculty are gonna wanna see that course as something valuable, and the students in many of those courses may find it really interesting, yet feel the negative peer pressure. So how do you folks deal with that? I mean, have you all seen this?
Mhm. I teach a class of 35 freshman pre-PA EMT class, so it's very technical. And invariably, there's one or two people who are highly engaged, and they constantly raise their hand, and I will actually find the person who made the comment, facial comment, and I'll try to get them in. So now they're part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And then from there on, I will utilize them to speak up for why, whatever is going on, and have them talk more. And usually that can work.
Other people? Interesting strategy to co-opt the students who make the faces. Yeah, it's not a bad idea.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna come back to this point in a second, but like Sue's point, I've done the same thing with students who talk too much. I've called them, I actually had students at one point on a 3-question limit per class. And I'd actually just hold up fingers when they asked the question, so the served as, you got one more. And that way they're done after that.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of overt calling out of it, not in front of the class, but in private, is not a bad way to try to wrap your head around. But what if you have a class where there's 3 who dominate and 27 will roll in their eyes?
I mean, this is more theoretical, but part of the solution would be to try to, create an environment where getting the right answer is something everybody wants to do, right? You want to be the person who has the right answer.
Mhm.
I don't know, I mean, I'm going back to the Jolly Ranchers, but at least in that regard, people, are rewarded, so they kind of, but in some sense, I want like an intrinsic
Well,
reward,
it's cooler.
right?
It's
Sure.
it lets them off the hook if they're doing it for a Jolly Rancher rather than like some sort of humanistic
Right.
search for
Yeah.
knowledge.
Exactly.
Like, that's uncool. But like
Exactly.
It's
selling their soul
There's
for a
some humor
T-shirt
in it,
or
right.
a Jolly Rancher or a team competition, right? Like our team has
Right.
bragging rights over your team because we got more answers right on the in-class review quiz.
Right.
You
More
know,
of like a game kind of thing.
yeah. But
Well, it's interesting because I think that's really true in a lot of general ed classes. Like you get a few students who are really engaged. You got, a group in the middle, but I think there are students who are totally disengaged. And now how do you integrate?
you're
all
teaching at
three
such different
groups?
levels.
And I think.
I've experienced that in the major too, though,
Yes.
I've got to say. And
Yeah.
I've had students who then, hit their senior year and they're like, I didn't know I was smart. Like they had been pigeonholed as like the jock or whatever. And it's like, you have a voice, you write really well, you think critically. Like, why are you hiding this? You
Yeah.
have that pull out
Right.
conversation. It's like,
Yeah.
I want you to feel more confident,
Right. Maybe a parent share. Put that one who's smart, that is unwilling to show it with someone.
Mentoring almost.
Yeah, and they come up with a collective answer, so that neither one is responsible for being smart. They're just smart together
Right.
until they feel more comfortable with that. I don't know. My students will kill each other for the right answer, so I'm the wrong person to ask because we even had almost a fisticuffs at charades. Athletic training charades. They were killing each other to get to be first. So they're very competitive.
What's interesting though is there is that bifurcation of students. The health science students tend to be very highly motivated, and then the other students are motivated in particular areas, but it's the general education courses are different. I'll be curious to see how the health science students are in the general education courses, not in their major courses, because I think that's where you might see some of that. But I don't know.
We love having them.
Yeah, I mean, I've always
They're
when I was
highly
at Quinnipiac,
motivated outside of their major.
I wanted the nursing students, I wanted the AT students, I wanted the because they just worked.
Yeah.
They were
AT,
machines.
PT,
Yeah.
exercise science,
Yeah, yeah.
OT, PA.
I'm really curious about, I've always been curious about the dynamic of where people sit in the classroom.
Oh, yeah.
Oh,
And the patterns they get into with their neighbors. And I've sometimes it's been a couple of years since I've been teaching regularly, but I used to make people sit in different places for a couple of
Like our
weeks.
students would freak out.
Oh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah,
I'm
it's
serious.
so
I
routine.
know this is
4 years in a row,
Yeah.
they sit in the same seat.
Yeah,
It's,
Yeah.
They walked into my class yesterday morning, and it's a new classroom that they hadn't been in. They were totally miscombobulated.
yeah,
So
they
they're like,
freak
okay,
out.
where do I-
yeah,
Yeah.
And Chris and I were talking earlier, I have taught behind them,
yeah,
drives them crazy.
I do that.
They're like, Sue, can you come back to the front? I'm like,
Yeah.
no, I'm actually
Yeah.
checking your computers.
Yeah,
They're like, what do you think we're doing? I'm like, I don't know, buying LLB boots? I have no
keeping
idea.
you honest.
Yeah,
yeah.
just seeing what you're doing.
It's actually one of the ways I keep students engaged is I always want to teach at a room where there's enough room to walk around and I can go and stand next to the student
Mhm.
who's checked out and I'll just start interacting with him or her and pull them in.
Classroom space has a lot
Yeah.
to do with
Yeah.
engagement
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
facilitating good and bad engagement. And
Yeah.
we've got some top of the line, state of the art, beautiful classrooms, and we have a lot of not.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it makes it really challenging if I'm trying to teach an intimate discussion, of 25 students, and I could get all 25 to say something intelligent in class, but if I'm in a cavernous room on the first floor of Lachlan, it's very unlikely to happen, even if I circle up. It's just, we have very weird spaces, and I've just never been asked what kind of classrooms I want. As we do all of this refurbishment, there's been no sort of what's important to you?
Well, that's interesting, Becky. I have two comments on that. One is I teach in 105, and there's space for gymnastics in the back of the
Yes.
room.
We
That's
do
a
theater
huge-
performances in there in my Shakespeare
Yeah,
class.
excuse me. And that's but two, you will be asked because I'm gonna be doing some work on trying to refurbish some classrooms that would be what faculty want. So I'm working with the provost to try to come up with some spaces.
It would just remove one more obstacle because
Yeah.
we want to be able to change the formation, do small group work, do and
Right.
and there have been, as we've renovated, there have been efforts to buy the kinds of desks that are much more collaborative and
You
things
folks
like
have a nice
that.
room in Weisinger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that we're on logistics, one of my pet peeves is, in the spaces I teach are just simple things like whiteboard space. I mean, math is whiteboard intensive.
Right,
So,
right.
and you walk into this room and you have this little board, and then you want to project something, you pull down the screen, and now you don't have a board anymore.
Yeah.
So I'm
And I hardly
sharing
use my
in
board.
these-
I mean,
You are right, exactly.
Yeah,
So
At Quinnipiac, they went in and mounted permanent screens over all the whiteboards.
Right.
So you had this much whiteboard space on each side, and
Exactly.
they put it permanent, so you couldn't move the screens, they were just mounted there. And they wheeled in a whiteboard if you needed it.
So silly.
It makes any sense.
It's not just us making
No.
decisions.
That is it, but classroom design is really interesting, and the physical space and your physical presence. I mean, Judy's point is a really interesting one. There's a book out that I've thought about using, and even chapters from or segments from called Small Teaching. Is anyone familiar with Small Teaching? It's by a guy named Jim Lang over at Assumption College, and he's done a series of articles that are in the Chronicle that I can actually link you all to if you want, and they're all just excerpts from his book. And what Jim talks about are making small changes in your class that will improve the learning experience for the students. And some of this has to do with some of the things we're talking about, simple things that you can do that are really easy, and one of which is the movement around the room, or if that's the kind of class you're teaching. So if you're teaching sort of a more active, engaged class where students are doing a lot of things, moving around the room, if you're doing a more of a discussion, set up the structure of the room for discussion. Now, Jim is an English professor, so he understands that kind of format, but he's worked with enough faculty who understand if you're teaching a class where you've got 35 students and you're doing more like things on the board, or move around the room, and there's data to suggest that proximity actually is an effective way to draw students' attention. There is data out there about touching students on the shoulder as a way to draw them in. I strongly discourage you from doing that. Those data were collected in the 90s. I think they were, I wouldn't, but those data show up sometimes. You say, well, I want to be comfortable with my students, so I can walk around and just touch them on the shoulder. Don't do that. But proximity does help. The other thing that there's a lot of data to support is varying both volume and pitch of voice helps keep students engaged. It's you know, from a cognitive psychology perspective, I can tell you attention starts to wane when the stimuli are consistent. So if you've got the same stimuli going for the whole class, students will start, so you need to vary up the stimuli. And it doesn't mean you need to be super entertaining. You don't need to engage in what's been called, have you folks heard the term edutainment yet?
I've heard.
Yeah, you don't need to be engaged in edutainment, but you need to be vary what you do a little bit. And that doesn't mean every class has to be different. It means you just have to vary a little bit. Students will be drawn to those kinds of responses. And in Lang's book, he talks about a lot of these things. One of the tips he gives, and I think this is a really good one, is about setting the tone really early. It comes back to what we talked about before, and that is early in the semester, making an effort to get to class a little early, even if it's 5 minutes, and say hi and talk to your students. It turns out, I get to class about 15 minutes early yesterday because I wanted to test the technology, and there were a few students there, and I already know those students because they sat there and chatted with me for the 15 minutes before class. They just talked to me about things, about their residence halls. Apparently Gulick is air conditioned. I didn't know this, is the only dorm that's air conditioned. They said, one student pointed out, he says, you have to live in prison to get air conditioning. It's like a prison,
It's a trade-off.
but it's a trade-off. And there's a lot of complaints about heat, a lot of laughter about Annie Warhol getting hurt at orientation. Not because they thought it was, you know, funny, ha-ha, but like the one who's most engaged gets hurt. And they were like, oh, poor Annie, they already love Annie, put her up on a pedestal, the freshman. And then all kinds of other things that you learn from the students, and then you can use that information.
She broke her ankle
She broke her
doing
ankle.
the jig,
Yeah,
doing
Yeah.
Irish step dance.
yeah,
Oh
yeah.
my God.
Her ankle just gave way.
Yeah.
It's apparently tradition that she does at the beginning and the end.
Well,
Yeah.
she should be ready for the end.
Yeah.
She should be okay about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's an important thing to do. I mean, and of course, given the class size of most of our classes, I mean, the data on learning students' names is really, it's powerful.
Is there a good way, for some reason, I'm having a harder time now.
It's been a
Okay.
couple years.
I'm getting old.
No.
Yeah, actually,
Getting
I can,
older.
I can explain it.
I
You've
need-
shepherded many
You got too
generations
many
of
names.
students.
Sure, you have too many
I
names.
I need a trick.
Yeah.
I need a strategy. Because now there's 34 in my intro class. I need to know.
So I use the name to note cards, and I have them write down besides their name, and I have them write down their favorite book and their favorite movie. And I tell them I don't particularly care what your favorite book or favorite movie is. I'm not gonna judge you on it because they're always afraid I'm looking for some deep psychological meaning.
Right.
Like, what do you want to know about
That's what you
me?
teach.
Do I have an issue with my mom? You know. But reality is, I want to use it as sort of anchors to hang their name on.
Okay.
I study them. I also I have them, and the students always think this is a little odd, but I make them the first day, and actually the first 2 days or 3 days, depending on the class. I make them hand me their cards, so I can look at them and look at their card.
Okay.
And then the second day, I hand them back to them, and then I make them hand them to me again. So I have to see them a couple of times.
Yeah.
And that helps. I do want to caution you, if you want to ask them questions about themselves, to keep it in something that you'll feel comfortable with, because I once asked students, this was years ago, to tell me something interesting about themselves that they wanted me to know.
Yeah.
And I had a student tell me she enjoyed dancing naked in front of the mirror to watch her body move. And that was way more information
You did
than I
not
needed.
need to
I
know
did
that.
not need to know. I could still remember her name. And that was 1996, but I don't need to know that.
No
So-
touching her shoulder.
No.
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 So
I
do you
wanted her in
mugshot
the other
them?
corner.
Have you ever mugshot them?
Yeah, and that's it.
We do, we
yeah,
have
we have their
mugshots.
IDs.
No, I mean I go around and take my own.
Oh, do you really?
So, and it only stays on my smartphone. I promise them this is not going on Instagram. I'm not going to tag you anywhere.
Yeah.
But I have them take a piece of paper like that and like
Write
very
their name.
boldly write their name.
Yep.
And I usually let them go in like 2s and 3s. And so
Okay.
then I learn, you know, Kyle T, Kyle O,
right.
Hayden, you know, and then yeah, just
Okay.
quiz myself.
Okay.
It's easier than having the school administered photo, like
Right.
Yeah,
because it's been in the
sometimes that
context
doesn't
of my
look-
classroom
Because sometimes a photo doesn't look like that.
at all.
Well, that-
Oh,
yeah.
right, no,
Yeah.
especially if it's black and white, like the black and
Well, and
white.
if they're
Right.
older, if they're
Yeah.
juniors or seniors, they probably change it in a couple of years.
It's
That's
true.
true too. So the mugshot idea, I've had the faculty members who have filmed their students stand in front and just say, "Hi, my name is," and just do the same thing. Becky, the one thing I feel bad cautioning you, but if they're 17, you're technically not supposed to snap their picture without parental consent.
do we have any 17-year-olds? And haven't they
Yeah, I
already
don't know.
signed? Haven't they already signed a thing that on
listen,
campus they can be photographed?
I don't, they might have, it's the only thing
Because like they're going to be pictured in
From
like
Marcon.
classroom
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
Marcon. So
Yeah. I mean, I don't worry about it, but I
Yeah.
just sometimes, you know.
a good
the
FERPA, yeah,
Mm.
thing to know.
But I do think that's a great idea to do something like that. I also make a point of giving some written assignment with their name on it the first week, even if it counts for 1 point, so I have to hand it back. And when you have to hand something back, you have to figure out who's the name, and so that's helpful. I also make an effort to try to get their names pronounced correctly early, so I'll do a phonetic spelling of their name on a card. I give them the right to have me call them whatever they want me to call them, which is usually fine. I did have a student once told me he wanted me to call him the Flash, not Flash, the Flash.
Flash.
So for all semester, I call him the Flash.
Okay.
I'm not here to judge. You want to be the Flash?
I have a
Chris,
student
yeah.
that I call Kansas,
Yeah.
Oh, right.
and I actually forgot her real name.
Yep.
She was from Kansas. Obviously, right? But her name was Kristen, but I for about a year I didn't know her real first name.
Yeah, I mean, you look for unique identifiers. Like I get a student from California, I'll remember this kid's name, or a unique name. But it's a challenge. And like you, Sue, I've been doing this since '92. I've been teaching. It's a lot of names. It's a lot of names over the last 26 years to try to remember. The worst is when you see them outside of campus 2 years after they graduate, and they're so happy to see you, and you're like,
Yeah.
"How are you?
I know,
You're
it's
looking
like-
for something."
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Do they know each other's names in your classes? I mean, if there were classes of majors and they've had a lot of classes with that cohort, but in gen education or in intro classes, do your students know each other's names?
Good question. Yeah,
Because-
probably not.
Yeah, I'll put them in groups at the end of the semester, and they'll have to they'll not know what names to put at the top of the page. And so I started doing like quizzes on each other's names. We'll like sitting around, and like start with yourself and like write down everybody's name, and to try to get us to be more of a conversation of equals instead of like I call on you, you answer. But like I can never get them to like respond to what I agree with what so-and-so said, or I disagree with, that's what I'm trying to cultivate,
Right.
and I'm hoping by them learning each other's names too, but my classes are relatively small, it's 25, but they're from all different disciplines, and they may only have this class together.
Sure.
You can jigsaw together discussion groups, which I've done in the past and kept track of what groups are together, and then consciously move the groups around and have students every class for the first 3, and I'll do this in first year seminar. Every class for the first 3 weeks, when you sit in your group, introduce yourselves, even if you know everybody's name, and then after 2 or 3 weeks, they start to get to know. But you're right, it's important to have them try to do that, but it's a challenge because they don't see the need, and that's where this whole notion of what Lang talks about, small teachings, is making them aware of why that's valuable, and not just telling them because they don't, but having them working with them to try to help them understand why that's valuable in discussions in particular, because frankly, discussions, if they're not discussions, so you want them to feel, but it is, and 24, I have 25 in my class, that's easier to do than at Quinnipiac. I was teaching classes of 75 to 100. It was hard to get those students to talk to each other. They all look to me for answers for everything.
Would it be inappropriate to ask a student before class to randomly disagree with something somebody says to start a conversation? I mean, if it's say, today I need you to disagree with somebody, when somebody says something, if you disagree, I need you to verbally disagree.
I mean,
and
sometimes
then-
we force them to take like
Yeah,
devil's
it's-
advocate
I've-
positions, and like they have to debate and sort of come up with, and like I don't care what you actually believe, but you have to make the case for X
Yeah,
or
we've done
Y.
that too, yeah.
It still is hard for them. They don't like confrontation in class.
No, they don't. You're absolutely right.
No.
We do a trick in business where we actually, for meetings, we'll have people wear hats. And so you'll have somebody who is the person who has to argue the meeting. And it gives somebody the permission to be, a bit abrasive.
Yeah.
And then so you have the person who's also going to be the proponent, find all the good, find all the bad, find the loophole. And so you give them the hats and tell them what role to play. And then it gives them the permission to get
They
outside
might
the
like,
box.
yeah, putting on a mask, impersonating.
Because it
them.
does, is it's not them now arguing.
Right.
It's a hat.
It's
Right,
the
that's
person in this position would say.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I like that.
Right.
Upper level students don't struggle with it as much, I would say, but my intro students really struggle.
And it's an interesting power dynamic. So in a class where you have seniors all the way to freshmen, seniors will almost bowl over the freshmen because they've got this experience. So it's an interesting dynamic. And I think that anything you can do, the hat idea, I never tried the hat idea. It's a great idea. I put students in debates before, but it's hard because sometimes the students all agree with one side. And so you put them on the other side and they're like, well, but really I don't agree. And you have to say, no, you can't. You have to disagree, and they don't want to because, again, the confrontation is a challenge for them. So, I think that as you think about this, I mean, there are strategies we talked about writing things down before, and again, there's ways to depersonalize it so students don't feel like they're being threatened, and you can have students write things down, and then I've done this in a number of venues. You have students then take what they've written down without their name and pass it off to another student. And then they get that student's answer back, and then they take that answer and they pass it off to another student. And you do like 6 passes, and then you can just call on any student to read off what's written down because it's not theirs. So they can say it, but they don't have to support it. And that gets students to sometimes take different perspectives as well. But the different perspectives is a challenge. And to be honest, for many of these students, they've never really thought about different perspectives. Their perspective is this, and to think about another perspective really shakes them. So it's good to do, but it's a challenge.
It's a sign of our society as well.
Yeah, it's tough for people to adopt a different perspective. They really feel very comfortable in their point of view. And I mean, I hope we're taking our students and shaking that a little bit so that they see that there's other perspectives. Whether or not they change their perspective is that's a personal thing. But I mean, for how many of you was college one of those positions where you went back and your parents like, well, you've changed? I know for me, I went back and my parents were like, what the hell happened to you? We sent you to Vermont. You come back a different person. But I didn't know what I didn't know when I got to. I mean, it was so silly. I didn't even know because I grew up outside of Worcester. I didn't know I had an accent until I got to Vermont, and everyone was making fun of me. Like,
People much older than 18 don't realize that.
they're like, what the hell are you saying? I said, where's the bubbler? What?
Yeah.
What are you talking about? And I had to say, bubbler, water comes out of it? Are you speaking English? What are you saying?
Special grinder sub discussion.
Oh, they were just all wrong. The whole college was wrong too. I had to fix everything. But so I didn't have that perspective at all. And I think for our students, it's good for them to see those different perspectives. And we as faculty bring that to them because most of us didn't grow up in this particular area. We don't, or where they did, we don't have the same perspective. So it's helpful for them.
But it's also just developmental. It's
It is
moving
totally
from
developmental.
this, dualistic right and wrong thing to, hopefully, I mean, that's what education is really. Moving to a place where we can see more sides and,
Right.
A colleague of mine started class yesterday with, is a hot dog a sandwich?
Oh,
And-
yes.
And they had, he's like, for 10 minutes, they argued. He goes, we were all, it's a sandwich, and then we all went as a not a sandwich. And then,
Right.
so something that benign,
Right.
where, but it shifted their perspectives multiple times in 10 minutes. So it was kind of,
Yeah, I love that when the stakes are really low,
Yeah.
That's
right?
right.
Start with that rather than like something terribly political and ethical,
Sure.
and like because
Right,
then
right.
it's very difficult.
right.
Or like the picture of the dress, is it, have you ever seen that? If it's
Yeah.
white or
Gold or blue.
gold and
Or black.
blue or black and
Yeah.
something.
Right.
But different people see two different color sets in one picture.
And the audio clip too. That was
Yeah,
a new
Yanni.
one.
or Yanni.
Oh,
Or if
I
the
never
dog
read
wore
that.
pants, would it be all
I
4
tried.
legs or just the back? That's my favorite.
Let's have these passionate debates. I want that.
Right.
The dog, if a dog wore pants, would they wear it
Should-
on all 4 legs or would it just be on the back?
Oh.
So that,
Only have
I've
to
never,
wait for
I've
the
never
answer
thought
just back.
about that. It's fascinating. So but I think.
He's thinking about it.
I think well,
You've got him engaged.
If you're a Disney character, you just don't wear pants. That's
probably
you
why.
go pantsless all the time. Unless you're,
So remember.
I guess Goofy wears pants. Pluto does not. I'm
Mickey
not
wears
sure
pants.
why.
Mickey wears
But he's
pants.
dividing on that.
Shorts.
Um,
Mickey
No,
wears
I
shorts.
yeah.
I mean, floor length.
That's right.
Too.
That's right. But I think Becky brought up a really interesting point, and that is one of the easiest ways to get students to engage and then build up from there is the low stakes stuff. Got to get them in low stakes stuff, and a lot of that is so that it's just a little bit of risk. I mean, it's not a big risk. I'm still stuck on the hot dog sandwich thing, by the way. Hot dog is a sandwich.
There's even more complicated ones beyond that.
Right.
Like, is a pizza roll a sandwich? And, you know, like, yeah.
Well, I was watching Good Will Hunting recently, and he called a hamburger a sandwich.
Oh.
And I thought, well, I don't know. So I said to my wife, is it really a sandwich? It's a burger. But it's between bread, but not regular bread. So, yeah, so I mean, it is, but it's the low stakes kind of argument. I think it'll be interesting if you go into class with that idea. And I think that there's a lot of data to support that students, when you start with low stakes things, you can build up actually fairly quickly to more high stakes things, but they need to be comfortable with those low stakes things. And it's an engagement that we need to invest in. And I think, Tyler, you said this before, you know, one of the things that, I use it I use it very flippantly because I don't really mean it, but when faculty say, why do students cheat? They say they cheat because it's easier to cheat than to study. If you make it easier to study than cheat, they'll study, because humans do what the path, right? So it's the same sort of thing, like what you were saying about engagement and about I just lost where I was going with that. But you know, Stephen.
Well, I know that the path of least resistance I've gravitated toward. I mean, I think students are, you know, that's human nature, right?
So make it easier to engage than to not engage, right?
Right.
But how do you do that? How do you make it easier to not engage? I mean, easier to engage than not engage. What do you do in your class? I mean, it's idiosyncratic to content. It's idiosyncratic to our personalities. And when you're in front of your class, how do you use who you are to try to get them to engage? Because frankly, one of the things that has been shown to be really effective is humor. But not everybody's funny. And if you're not funny, don't try to be funny.
I think from a figure, I try to create quite a bit of humor. The class is pretty clear cut and dry. But I tell them, if you laugh, you're breathing. If you're breathing, you're getting more oxygen, which means that your brain is more awake.
That's right.
It's good.
So it kind of fit in teaching EMP and technology.
Yeah. And then use your content as a way to drive some of that too. I mean, as I said, I teach psychology. Psychology is actually not that hard to get students interested in, because frankly, students are interested in themselves. And they're all sitting there thinking, why do I do it? Why did I do that last night? And they want to know, right? But it's still a challenge sometimes because there's theories there. They don't want to mess with the theories. And then, you know, I hit them with research methods and they don't want to hear that. So you have to work to get them engaged. And all of that, all these little things we talk about really do add up. That's the point of that book, Small Teaching. And I encourage you folks to take a look at it. And now, as I said, is anyone interested? I can send you the essays, the link to the essays.
Sure.
Jim Lang's essays are in the they're really good. And they're synopsis of this book. You don't need to buy the book. Jim's made enough money off the book.
Do we own the book in the collection? I just have it here.
Right.
What's that?
Is it in the Batson collection? Or not, they're not
I
Batson
have
anymore.
it in the Hackala collection right there.
I
So,
know, but
yeah.
Carrie or someone would buy that
Yeah,
for us,
yeah.
so.
It's interesting. Jim he doesn't care about like giving away the articles too. When I talked to him, I saw him recently. He said that he's paying for his daughter's wedding with his latest royalty check. His latest royalty check.
This
so
is not
he's-
typical of authoredom.
No, he's been
No.
on Good Morning America. He's made a lot of money off his book. So he's sort of so he's fine with it. But the point he makes in all of these is it's not big changes to your class. It's little changes, little things. Getting to class at human service, learning the names, moving around, giving students low stakes opportunities to succeed, and then they'll succeed more. Varying pitch, varying physical space, all of that. I mean, when you talk about teaching from the back of the classroom, as much as students hate that, they pay attention. I mean, they get a little freaked out about it, but they pay attention.
Right.
When I used to teach a class that was 2 hours, I used to get students in the middle of class get up and do some kind of physical activity for 10 seconds. jumping jacks, running something. And then they had to sit in a seat that wasn't theirs, and it had to be 5 seats away from where they were. Which, by the way, most of them didn't do, but logistically they'd be like, where do I go? And they got thinking a little bit and moving around, and that was very effective to get them back again when I had to get them back. And so all of these little things can help with student engagement, but it's a matter of being very intentional and being very upfront about it. I am very clear about telling students from day one, in class, I want you to be present, to be here. And I said, there are gonna be days where it's gonna be hard for you to be present because of all these things going on. But when you come to class, I want you to be present. You see, you were talking about the computers before. And I'm not gonna come down on whether or not you have electronics in the classroom. That's a topic for another day. But I tell students all the time, this is a tool that I want you to use in class that's gonna help you learn. If you're using the tool in a way that's not helping you learn, think about that and try to use the tool effectively, or don't use the tool if it's not gonna help you learn. And so all of those kinds of things help. And then following through on these things, being engaged yourself. I'm always amazed at how faculty, I mean, have any of you observed colleagues teaching ever? You ever seen a colleague who you think, my God, the students are bored, but my faculty member is bored too. And that's tough when you see the faculty member being bored. So how do you not be bored with what you're doing?
Years ago, I used to look a lot at students' syllabi, and I saw a professor's syllabi who, in their attendance policy, talked about you need to be in class in spirit, mind, and body. And they talked about what does it mean to be here in spirit, and what does it mean to be here in mind, and what does it mean to be here in body. And I borrowed it for years, but I think it was a great approach.
It's interesting when students, you ask them the purpose of class. Just ask your students something, the purpose of class. And they'll say, I'm here to learn. And that's the generic answer. And then you ask them, what's supposed to happen in class? Lecture. And then you have to push them a little, because Becky, I think in your classes, because of the discussion, the students are kind of stunned by what they're supposed to do in there, I imagine, because in some classes, they've not had to have that kind of conversation, and not just in college.
Or they think that
before.
anything goes, and they
Anything
think that,
goes.
just any opinion is equally valid, right? And that's as big of a problem.
Yeah, I mean, I get that in psychology all the time, but I get, what I love is, my high school teacher said this, that when I had a student tell me once, their high school teacher told them, if you take ecstasy, it burns holes in your brain. And so don't take ecstasy.
It doesn't? No, oh, I'm good.
And I sat there and thought, well, okay, I mean, listen, kudos for you for keeping your students off ecstasy, I guess, but that's really bad information you're giving these kids. I have in the past done Psychology Myth Day, where I have students write down everything they know about psychology, and then they go through the myths. And it's staggering how much they have, but I guess they have that about all disciplines based on their experience. It's a way to try to help them, again, low stakes, like the 10% of the brain myth. I hear that all the time. You only use 10, 12, 15%, depending.
Words for snow.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks, Save Your Warf. I appreciate that. But they don't ever consider challenging those until we help them challenge those. And one of the things that I love about working with college students, and to be fair, I only had one day yesterday with the students, but they remind me a lot of students I've taught for years and years, is that first couple of days, they're willing. You got them the first couple of days. That's when you capitalize on it. They're there. My students were eager. Nobody sat in the back row by the gymnastics court in 105. Everybody sat up a little. So I had everybody up front. I had everybody sort of listening. I got them laughing because, frankly, I don't know about the rest of you, but the screen court in 105 is just a little too tall for a guy who is vertically challenged like me. And my ups are only about 3 inches, so I barely got it.
It'll also knock.
Well, when I knocked it once, it started moving.
Yeah, the whole class.
Yeah. It's an interesting class, but you take advantage of those times. I mean, I wanted to have this conversation early in the semester. For this is the time to capitalize. You get them now, and then they will be able to do things throughout the semester. So anyway, I know it's time for people to go, but thanks for coming, folks. We plan to have these throughout the semester. You won't get a mug every time, you get the inaugural one, so you get a mug this time, but there will be coffee and snacks and muffins or something. Thanks, I appreciate the conversation, and I'll have, Bree, do we get everyone's name so I can